It's me back again. It's sort of interesting. I'm doing this under the hat of Victoria University. So I'm the opening presentation, and my colleague Mike Joy tomorrow is the closing one. So it's kind of nice that Vic can come here and do the beginning and do the end. It's like the bookends of both. My presentation is titled Economics, Ethics and Animal Agriculture. What if Seba et al. Is right? A bit of a background about me first. I'm trained as an economist, and I've worked at such specialist places such as the Treasury and various other god-awful parts of the public service. After about 20 years of working for an assortment of tosspots, you can imagine a 2x2 matrix here, which has on one axis bad organisation, toxic organisation, and on the other axis bad manager, extremely bad manager. I spent most of that time not in the better quadrant. So I now did a complete career change, and I bought 3 trucks, and I now do mobile sandblasting when I'm not doing conferences such as this. But I'm trained as an economist, and so that's what I'm here to talk about today. Warning. I'm purposely trying to make you think and challenge you, but I'm trying to do it in an incredibly respectful way. Is anyone here familiar with De Bono's 6 hats? Anyone? Could you please briefly explain what they are?
6 different ways of looking at a problem.
Yep.
By applying each idea, it helps you to solve the problem. It looks at a deeper level and helps you to come up with better results.
Thank you very much. That was really well done. Really well done. Now, within these 6 hats, the hat which I'm wearing today is the black hat. And the black hat is the analyst and the internal critic. So I'm the naysayer of the room, and I'm the naysayer of the group. And so to start it off, that's purposely what I'm doing. So please realise this is the frame that I'm wearing at the moment. Now, I'm a huge fan of regenerative agriculture. If I wasn't, I would not be here. And I love what you do. And if animal agriculture is going to have a future, you are its future. But you never ever believe anything a former Treasury analyst says that's preceded by the word but. And here's the but. I don't think animal agriculture has got a future. So what economists are really good at is running a series of thought experiments, effectively different scenarios and alternative worlds. So let's go on a bit of a journey on some of those alternative worlds. I want to start off with where I'm going. So the first thing, as an economist, I'm really interested in scarcity. So I want to look at the efficiency of different forms of production quickly, just to illustrate some points. The second thing I want to do is, if you're not familiar with it already, is introduce you to some of the ideas in a report that came out towards the end of last year from an international think tank called RethinkX. And it was about the future of dairy and cattle production in the United States. But the lessons from there are directly applicable around the world. And what I say is, that report's pretty bloody depressing. So I'm saying, can New Zealand pivot? And I look at 3 different ways which New Zealand can pivot, and I say, what does that mean to regenerative agriculture with respect to animal agriculture? And then thankfully we get to some conclusions. But let's get started. Efficiency. Here's a container with 1 litre of milk in it. As you can tell, because I've gone and called it 1 litre. Now that comes from one of those things. Now in New Zealand, they'll do about 5,000 litres a year roughly. But let's just focus on the 1 litre at the moment. Now, our cow needs 1,000 litres to make the 1 litre. Now, for those of you that don't recognise that, it's an IBC container and it contains exactly 1,000 litres. Now, milk itself is a fantastic product, but it's about 87 to 88% water, depending on the time of the season. Now, the balance of that is a mixture of fats, sugars, and proteins. Let's look at the proteins part of the story. Now, to get to the proteins, we burn a lot of coal, and that gets rid of the 87%. We are then left with our proteins, it's about 33 grams. So as an economist, I kind of look at the 33 grams at the end, and that kind of looks pretty, it just doesn't feel that good. Doesn't feel that good. So that's the first thing I want to look at. Now, RethinkX looked at exactly the same thing, and they called it the inefficiency of animal agriculture in converting energy into protein. And they came up with a number of conclusions. I'm not going to read them. I'm just going to put them up so you can see them, because you can read as well as I can. So there's a story about time. And the time they give is not 2040 or 2050 or 2060 or sometime later. It's 2030. It's within 10 years. Their prediction is that plant-based meats in the form of at least hamburger quality meat will meet price parity internationally by 2023. After which point it will only be cheaper. Doesn't do great things to your cold cow market. There's a story about, well, if that's going to happen, what's going to replace it? And this is the sort of stuff that they're talking about replacing. Now, a little point of clarity here, what they're talking about is not trying to get something like peas to pretend it's a piece of beef. What they're actually doing is replicating the actual proteins. So if you want a quick and dirty way of thinking about it, think about vitamin C. The vitamin C that's made in the lab is molecularly exactly the same as you get in an orange. It's vitamin C. What does this mean a little bit after that? Well, they're saying there's a whole lot of land that's going to be freed up because it just is not going to be needed. And it said the cost of these things will be at a minimum half and up to 80% cheaper. Oh, and by the way, they're saying in the States that's what's going to happen to farm prices. And then they sort of say is that, and the example they use is Brazil. And they're saying, if you're a country like Brazil that has agriculture as a major base in your economy and as a major orientation of your exports, it's going to be a bit difficult. And as soon as I read that, I said, take away the word Brazil, put New Zealand, exactly the same story. So, the take-home message is kind of that. So, the bottom line is, if you can effectively make, and I'm using cows at the moment, but a protein's a protein. So, if you can make the equivalent of cow proteins that are exactly the same, if not better, a whole lot cheaper, without the cows, and without any of the ethical or environmental issues that go along with that, that's not great news for the folks that own cows. And it's not great news if you happen to be doing the first stage production of the milk that comes from the cows that involves burning the coal I mentioned earlier. So I want to do a bit of a jump because that's pretty depressing. And I want this to be a happy conference, and it's not even 5 to 9 yet, and I don't want people jumping off the top of the stairs, so I want to restore some hope pretty happily. So here's my first thought experiment. One of the major disruptions that happened to New Zealand was the advent of synthetics in terms of fabrics. If you go back 40 or 50 years ago, the white gold of the time was a stuff called strong wool. It was not milk, it was strong wool. It's fantastic stuff. And I want to tell a story about as late as 1980, I've got a colleague of mine, he used to be at Massey, and he's kept a report from Massey from 1980. And it basically said, look, yeah, Britain's gone and joined the EC. What a bugger that was. Shit. But hey, look, don't worry. There's Japan and there's all these countries in Asia and there's four tigers. And look, once they get to middle class status, because that's what they're going to do, they're suddenly going to want the consumption patterns of the West, which means they're going to want carpets. Which means there's not going to be enough sheep in New Zealand to be able to carpet the whole of South Korea. That was the gist of what they had to say. Problem was, it didn't turn out like that. Their crystal ball kind of missed the 10,000k service about 50,000k's before. But I told you there was a good news story in here and you wonder where it comes from. And I think there's a fantastic story about fine wool. Look at what the merino guys have done. They are some of the most impressive people I have ever seen. And they are doing fantastic stuff. And so if you can say, well, out of the collapse of strong wool, what's gone really well? Well, fine wool has gone fantastically well. And it's doing extremely well. So here's the thought experiment I've got. Would regenerative animal agriculture, in a world that's outlined by Seba and his colleagues, would that be the equivalent of what fine wool is now to coarse wool? I've got people looking a little bit more optimistic, a little bit of hope in there. And we can take that a bit further. Here's the bloke from KPMG, Ian Proudfoot. Now, Ian's a really smart guy. And his argument's pretty simple. We don't need to feed the world, we just need to feed 40 million rich folks. But the critical thing we need to do is be able to give a story about sustainability, about it being authentic, about it being clean, and most importantly, about having the most fantastic backstory. So this would be the thing about the frolicking lambs and the cows chewing their cud on lush green pastures with nice clean streams, with rosy-cheeked farmers. And it's the whole story about the whole way across the value chain, about this is where everything starts, and it's a fantastic thing. Here's the bloke from Petone, who's just about to go to Wellington Airport and blast the lines off a car park. That's before where I'm clean. See, unlike Shane Jones, I wear high-vis, but my high-vis is dirty. So this is what the bloke from Petone says. The bloke from Petone is basically saying, if Seb is right, then that means there's something like just shy of 200 million hectares of land that's currently in animal agriculture that's up for grabs. Now, to put that into perspective, that's a quarter of the size of continental USA. It's bigger than the original Louisiana Purchase, and it's about 7 times New Zealand's total land mass. It's quite a big chunk. So what I'm saying there is, if all of those farmers are disrupted, and they're looking at an alternative, just maybe they've spotted the same 40 million people that Ian spotted. So the point that I say is that, look, whether it be 40 million or 100 million or 200 million, doesn't really matter. The point that I'm saying is that New Zealand will not be the only people in the market trying to play the same game. Because the other ones, if they want to survive, that's what they're going to have to do. Now, the bloke from Petone is also interested, when he's not blasting airports, at the interface of economics and ethics. Because economics as a discipline often says it is amoral rather than immoral, but that is often just a euphemism for behaviour that's just basically outrageous. So I want to call out some of the outrageous. If you look back at economic history, there's been various modes of production that, to be quite frank, have been absolutely horrible. the link between the Industrial Revolution, textile manufacture, cotton, and slavery in the antebellum South is probably one of the most well-known examples. But the linkage between Wales and light, look, there's a whole bunch of them like that. Sugar industry based on slavery. So these are some pretty horrible things. Now, the point is, back in the day, most people knew about that. They knew that when they had a shirt on, it originally came from slaves. But hey, the shirts are really comfortable. And I'm not one of the slaves. So I don't really care. Most people basically held their noses. They just ignored it. Why? Because there was no cheap alternative. And that was apart from a very few. Now, if you look back into the 19th century and even to the later part of the 18th century, the people that said slavery, look, this is just wrong, they generally tended to come from the Enlightenment, so they took a humanitarian perspective, or they would come from a religious background and say that this is an affront to God. Either way, they said this was a terrible, terrible thing. And they were right. But being right was actually really expensive. But now we have mechanical harvesters. And when you have mechanical harvesters, suddenly you have the situation where being moral is cheap. So if being moral is cheap, everyone wants to be moral, it becomes democratised. Sorry, I'll go back. I want to go back to Ian's background story. You know, about the little, you know, the frolicking lambs, the green pasture, the nice clean streams and rivers, rosy-cheeked farmers. Works really well, right up to the point the animal died. And at that point, not even a Saatchi's can save you. I mean, I was interviewed by Peter Williams on Magic Talk, Talkback Radio about 3 weeks ago. And that's the successor to News Talk ZB, which is not exactly normally what's on in the truck when we're driving around town, but nevertheless I was on it. And he was asking exactly around this sort of stuff. And I said, look, this is the problem. Imagine, you know, I'm of an age, and why the movie is older than I am, just about every kid my age and older remembers Bambi. Because we didn't have Netflix or anything back in the day, the dark ages of time. You went off to the movie theatre on a Saturday and you'd go and watch the cartoons, and Bambi was one of them. And so everyone remembers the scene by the lake where there's Bambi and Bambi's mother. And Bambi's mother goes, "It's hunters. Run faster, Bambi, and don't look back." You can't sell that one. So the question I've got here is, despite all the bits and pieces which are fantastic and nice, how does that fit in? So I want to get to some conclusions, because I'm determined to stick to time. I'm determined to allow you to ask some questions, and I'm going to make sure that I walk the talk. So let's start off here. So if Seba is right. Now look, there's a whole debate about whether Seba is right, and that's a very, very valid debate. But as an economist, I've just gone and said, I assume he's right, I'm going to give the guy the benefit of the doubt. If he's wrong, for most of you people, that's probably a good thing. It's an upside risk. But I'm giving you the downside risk. Now, it means animal agriculture is in really big trouble, and that includes you guys. Because it means poor folks won't be able to afford it, because remember, you're trying to do a premium market. But rich folks don't want to buy it, because the ethics have changed. I mean, the question I've got is, the vegans of today, are they effectively the intellectual successors of the abolitionists of the 19th century. I mean, here's a thought experiment. If any of you took your, say, a grandchild or a great-grandchild in 20 years' time into an abattoir, what do you think they'll think of it? Because they would have grown up in a world where animals don't have to die for you to get this. An industrialised slaughter of that nature, you know, when you've never had it, that's going to be really tough. But hey, let's say Seb is right, but I'm wrong, and there is a market for animal agriculture, then every displaced farmer in the States, in Brazil, in Argentina, in Australia, are going to be chasing the same few rich people. So that's the challenge I'll sort of put to you, and that's what I view as your big existential risk. Does anyone have any questions? At the back, your hand went up really fast.
Yeah, I just wanted to suggest that the people that came up with RethinkX are very good at models, but they could very well fall into the same category as the people that predicted it will not be up for.
Yeah. I think you make it. Did everyone hear the okay, do we have a walking mic? Or quickly, what the statement was, please tell me if I don't get your question quite right, was, hey, what the RethinkX people did was basically a bit of modelling got wrong. Look, the guys at Massey got their modelling wrong. How do we know that this modelling's not wrong too? Is that a fair summary? Yeah. I agree. I absolutely agree. Which is why I've premised with it, what if Seba is right? But hey, here's the point that I'd sort of respond back to you, is that the technology they've got to do this is not magic. It exists. We have it now. It will only get better. And the point is that because this is a manufactured system and not a biological system, it follows the same sort of cost curve as computer chips and big screen TVs and cell phones. So what they've done with the projecting forward is they've basically said, this is the cost of it now. We know there's some cost curves that will fall exponentially. At what point will it hit certain levels? And why they use 2030 is that is the point where they're saying that a kilogram of protein will be under $1 a kilo. So they say at that point, everything's over. So, you know, I think the question is very fair. It's a future prediction, but remember, these are the same guys that talked about the take-up of cell phones, the take-up of electric cars. What they're doing is they're working in an industry which they see technology will disrupt. And the problem with disruption is it's not about evolution and coexistence. It's about disruption and replacement. So that's the bit that I miss from a lot of the commentators, because they talk about the opportunities of this for New Zealand. I'm telling you now, there's no opportunities of this for New Zealand. Yep.
Thanks, Peter. I always enjoy your thoughts. First point, I think most of our cell phones come from a lot of slave labour.
Yep.
So it's happening right now.
Yep.
Second point, to multiply that broth of meat,
yep,
you still need to kill an animal at this stage.
Yep.
So the ethics are just as much of an issue as what we're doing now, just on a smaller scale. It's either a small scale or big scale, it doesn't matter, you either have it or you don't. The other point is it is GMO derived,
yep,
so that's on the point that people will accept that. And the last point is the broth is made from antibiotic starter, so as long as people are happy with those the point that it's GMO and antibiotic, which I find unethical as well, in my opinion, this is my opinion, then they also have major challenges that the people of this world are happy to take that up. So that would be my response to Rethink, that is the big challenge to get over. I know it's a statement, not a question, but you could comment to what I've just
Oh,
said.
sure. And my short answer is, I agree with everything you've said. And remember, as an economist, what I'm doing is setting up a thought experiment. I'm not saying that I agree with RethinkX. I'm not saying I hope RethinkX happens. I'm just saying, here's a bunch of people who have given an argument. How does that argument play out to you if they happen to be right? So I'm not here to support them. I'm not here as an evangelist for them. I'm just saying that what if. But I agree with your points.
Sorry, just on that. So my response to that too is none of those companies or people can actually build ecosystems. So as far as I'm concerned, in our operations, unless we are building carbon, our water cycles, etc., then I think we're wrong.
Yeah.
But if we've got a story like that, then that is hugely positive to our planet, not extractive or exploitive. So that would
Yeah.
be...
And I'm still absolutely agreeing with you. Because remember what I said at the beginning is I love what you do, and if animal agriculture has a future, you are the future. It's that last bit I'm just questioning.
Yeah, sorry.
So sorry, I could hear a voice from somewhere. You're coming out the speaker.
The gentleman just took the question in the last part a little bit. But, I agree with you around disruption of technology and food systems. But what you haven't really talked about is carbon and sequestration, because that's really the bigger picture that underpins the entire change of the system for balanced ecosystems.
Yeah, and I absolutely agree with what you're saying as well. And it really is because we live in a carbon limited world, and we cannot continue with what we're doing now. So well, I think we're on the same point there. The question comes down to, I'll put on Seba's hat for the moment, and I'll channel what Seba's answer would be. He would say, with just shy of 200 million hectares of land, which has currently gone out of a form of agriculture which is hugely carbon producing, firstly, that's a good thing, and it gives you optionality around what to do with that land that would be potentially carbon negative. Now, what you've done is kind of put the two together and done it in the same place. Because, you know, if you look at what Alan Savory, as it says, is that you actually make the soil as your major source of your carbon sink and blah, blah, blah. You guys know all of that. So, yes, again, I'm agreeing with you, but they get to the same point, just in a slightly different way.
Peter, up here at the top.
Sorry.
I was working a minute. I just want to make one comment, and maybe one question. The other thing, and I agree entirely with what's been said, the other thing is that this fermented food is not going to live on air, right? These bugs don't live on air.
Yeah.
They live on carbon and they live on nutrients.
Yeah.
So they're going to need a lot of them.
Yeah.
So there's no consideration from what I can hear of that in here. So those farmers that in America that are currently doing animal farming will probably have to switch to cropping.
Yeah.
That's it. No.
Yeah.
Okay, that's just one thing. It's this idea that you can grow these things in a vat or something, that they still need nutrients and they still need carbon.
Yeah.
The other question I've got is the prediction from Massey was made by, presumably by academics who have hope and some independence. Who is this organisation, ThinkX, and who funds them? You always have to ask the question, who's putting this message out?
Okay, I'll do the second question first, because that's the easiest one to answer, is I don't know. It's a report from 40 odd years ago, and the reason I looked at it was because if you look at an old report, that's fundamentally wrong, it's useless. So that's, but I think your general point is look who pays the bill for it, and that's quite important. I think that's a fair point. In terms of your nutrients thing, absolutely agree, because this is not 0 point energy. Something just doesn't materially come out of nothing. It's got to have energy in some form, whether that be sugar or carbohydrate or photosynthesis. It's got to have energy going into it. Now, to be fair to the RethinkX, and remember, I've compressed a 70-odd page report into one slide. So there's lots of stuff I've missed out that, to be honest, they actually have covered. And when they're talking about that bit of land that goes out of animal agriculture, they've actually made an allowance for a land that has to stay in some form of agriculture to provide the enemy to run the bathtubs. So they had actually allowed for that. Okay, I can do one more question. Sir?
We need 40 million rich people.
Yeah.
Let's say there are 4 billion rich people in 10 years' time.
Yeah.
So that's 1% of
Yeah.
the rich people.
Yeah.
Is that doable?
And this is, I don't know. I don't know for exactly the same reasons I've said before about projecting future. I've just gone and said a what if. And the what if I've put into it is really two of them. I've said if the ethics change, it means you lose a demand side. So what I'm outlining as an economist is a potential demand side problem. But what I'm then saying, if Sevitt is right, there's a potential supply side problem because a whole lot of disruptive agriculture will be looking at the same, whether it be 1% or whatever the hell it is, if there are still people buying it as a premium product or whatever. What I'm saying is that a whole lot of animal agriculture that's existing now will be focusing on the same people. So that's the only point I'm saying. So I'm trying to outline to you where a demand side shock would be and a supply side shock would be. And I'm not trying to do a prediction about which one would come in. I'm just outlining where the landmine particularly is sitting when you're walking across the field. Okay, well, thank you everyone for listening.